The frequency of sampling is obviously critical. Can you say a bit about the latest developments and technologies for sampling so that one can actually get more real-time sampling rather than waiting for volunteers to give you a sample every quarter or every month? And the other question I have, which relates to someone else's question around why is the sampling only around the edges of the lake? Are there ways, again, of automating, and I'm thinking here of drones, automated devices that could actually fly across the lake and pick up samples in specified places? These sorts of methods are beginning to be developed in agriculture, so I'm wondering why they can't be done on water.
So yeah, I can give a quick response.
Lancaster University.
Okay. So there's often a tension between space and time in terms of coverage. The big Windermere survey is an example of good spatial coverage, less frequent temporal coverage. So for me, it's about combining those type of approaches, because with the best will in the world, there won't be the budget to deploy SONs at 100 odd sites around the Windermere catchment. So it's about combining spatially intensive surveys with targeted deployment of in situ monitoring, whether that's SONs or we can actually now have labs on a kiosk next to the riverbank doing the lab work in almost real time. So I think it's about how you combine those in the future to the best effect. Do you want me to pass that to Steve? You might have to see you. Just to say on drones, we have, and United Utilities has also been trying to deploy drones as part of the big Windermere survey to reach some inaccessible areas, but also perhaps to take transects across the lake.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on the drone comment as well. I mean, yeah, it's potentially a really useful technology to get spatial coverage over the lake surface. There's a bit of validation work that needs to be done with any kind of optical approach like that, any kind of remote sensing approach, so you know exactly what you're measuring in terms of reflectance when the data comes back from the water. And you have to bear in mind that you get really great horizontal coverage of the lake, but you're only looking at the surface film of the water probably, and not what's happening up below the surface. But there's a real sort of strength that comes from integrating different kinds of data so that you can combine the strengths of monitoring over time in different ways with lighting over space to build a more complete picture. And where we are now is we've had more methods available, we've got more methods available to us now than we've ever had before, really. And one of the bigger challenges now, I think, is how you bring all these different types of evidence together to arrive at a sort of cohesive overall picture of change where you're informed by all of those different approaches. Yeah, absolutely.
I think just to add as well that I should say our SOMs don't measure total phosphorus at the moment. It's a relatively new technology that's being developed and something we haven't got at the Environment Agency yet. So it's something we may hope to have in the future, and there's a possibility that it could be put into the catchment in the future as well.
It's on your shopping list.
Yes, it's a very expensive shopping list, unfortunately.
Great. People are whispering things in my ear, but everyone keeps getting on deaf. So I've been asked to remind people to fill out the second QR code survey on what improvements they want, and is that QR code on the it's whizzing around, so you have to snap it quick, or speak to us afterwards, send us an email, and we can capture your views that way as well. That's a really good idea, isn't it?
We will be doing a follow-up, very short questionnaire, but we'll do a follow-up one after the event.
Thank you for an amazing night. My question is, we've talked a lot about the inputs that are going in now, but what about the stuff that's been in there since the 1700s?
Yes, so we sort of haven't touched so much on the sediments in the lake bed, but I think Lindsay mentioned that there's been a lot of work, and there's people in the audience, I think, who are real experts in the study of paleolimnology. So there's been a lot of nutrient particularly accumulating in lake sediments. It's obviously come in historically, and so what we know from where that data has been collected and it's been studied quite extensively in S-weight water, for example, is the sediments are quite enriched in phosphorus and other nutrients. So there is potential, particularly in terms of when we see the oxygen decline that we get during the stratified period in those lakes, for that nutrient to be released out to the water column, and then potentially it might be being mixed back up to the surface and available to algae. But the thing about the release of sediment nutrients is that it's quite complicated because of this sort of disconnection between those deeper waters where there's a lot being released because there's not much oxygen around, and there's big biogeochemical changes which affect not only chemical binding of phosphorus in the sediment, but also the microbes which live in those sediments. And so the process is quite complicated, and it's not really easy to characterise that and compare it to some of the other sources that we might have that are contemporary. But potentially, the accumulation of those nutrients in the sediments store up issues that can become important in the future. Yeah.
I'll do this one down. I'll come.
Thanks very much. A really interesting set of presentations. I've got a kind of what if money was no object kind of question, and I just wonder what the magic bullet is here. What do we really need to be doing? And that you can take that from a science point of view or from an action point of view. It'd be really interesting to hear.
Well, Dave's got a shopping list.
I'm just trying to remember how to phrase this, because this might not be from an organisational point of view. Max,
Close the doors, please.
straight into
Start recording.
speculative water planning. Let's call it that. I would say making sure every discharge into the lake had phosphorus removal technology on it. That would be a start for me. I don't think there's any need to change what's there at the moment in terms of the infrastructure particularly. It's just the phosphorus is the problem, and to get people to maintain their tanks, and if that phosphorus technology was removable, to get it onto all septic tanks and all discharges. I think that would be my top of the list personally.
I give you the science priority, which we've touched on, but I don't think has been a real focus, which is in 50 or 100 years' time, what's going on in Windermere in terms of the processes that we can monitor today and for the last 100 years almost. Are those processes going to operate in the same way in the next 50 or 100 years? Are they going to be altered by temperature? Are they going to be altered by rainfall patterns in the catchment and the delivery of pollutants from land? I think this is scientifically, I know people don't necessarily want to hear about more uncertainty, let's get on with action, but there are some big uncertainties coming at us, and the kind of climate change scenario and what Windermere will look like, I think is one of the areas that we haven't really got very, very strong answers to, but Steve might want to say something.
I think that's probably Lindsay.
Well, no, I'm just going to add one thing. So, as well, if money was no object, we would have a lot more monitoring going on in the lake and the wider catchment, covering everything from water chemistry to biology at higher spatial and temporal frequency than it currently is, because obviously cuts are one of the major reasons that some of the monitoring activities have stopped over the last few years, and there's nothing that the organisation running those programmes can do. They can only do what they can with the funds available. So.
Yeah, amen to that. I definitely agree to that one. And to complement what Ben said as well, Ben was talking about quite long-term trajectories of changing, having some confidence around what those might be. But I think another really useful thing that we would work towards with all the funding in the world would be more of a near-term forecasting system as well. I think weather forecasts for water quality. If we could develop something like that so that it was actually possible to make a prediction over the near term, over the next few days to weeks, and then you can tell people this is what to expect over that next short while, that could really be transformative, I think, not just scientifically, but also in working with the population, with the community, and actually being able to share knowledge with people and inform people. So I think that would be an amazing innovation to do as well, or involved to arrive there.
I'd just make a plea. I'd just make a plea for ecology as well, because ecology tells the story of the lake. Water quality tells you a certain amount of information, but it's the response of the ecology in the lake that really starts to give people an indication for how well that lake is performing. And there's not a lot of ecological monitoring on Windermere. There's some. We've seen tonight fisheries is not being really done, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that we could do to tell the story of the lake in a much better way that engages people in the journey as well, isn't it?
The Environment Agency can only enforce require compliance as far as the law requires. What would be the most the change in the law that would make the biggest difference that we should be lobbying?
I think I referred earlier to the general binding rules, and I think that's something that really needs to be looked at, because it's applied as a panacea at the moment. It's the same for discharges to rivers and to lakes, and when you look at the Windermere catchment, every catchment's unique, but Windermere does have a peculiar set of circumstances in that it does have a lot of wastewater treatment works, and it has a lot of septic tanks, all discharging into, essentially, directly or indirectly, still waters into the lakes. And I don't think the general binding rules really accounts for that, because there are issues where the general binding rules, they will look at if it's discharged into a protected area, for example a triple SI, but not into a still water. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at, and we are talking to our national colleagues about that, but that will be quite a significant policy change and will take a lot of work. But I think for me that would be something that needs to be looked at. But then it's the application of that, and there is at the moment that technological limit in terms of septic tanks will only treat so much and need to be maintained. So there is that technological limit on there, that needs to be taken into account as well. I think that will do it for me. Possibly not corporate responsible. In terms of Windermere, I think that will work.
Can I ask a connected question?
Yeah, it's been great to hear all the evidence tonight, and no doubt there's been a lot that's been in the media over the last few years. It's good to hear that it's not just United Utilities. I know that we can't solve the septic tank problem overnight, but obviously we heard about the Ambleside reaction and just wondered what other moves we could be making on the ground locally. I mean, what environmentally would be these solutions, apart from using Valentine as an example for farming, which you probably should be promoting? Is it reed beds or what are we looking at?
I know the National Park Authority, they've got a project they're undertaking at the moment called Revere. That's been funded through, I think, the national parks nationally, and that is looking at different types of interventions that could be done, like you said, reed beds. You mentioned tree planting before. It's also looking at possibly tree planting on those riparian buffer strips, but it's got to be the right tree in the right place. So that's a project that's going on at the moment. So it is those other kind of solutions where interventions can be put in place, natural interventions such as reed beds, wetlands and woodlands, to try and intercept that phosphorus before it gets into the watercourses. So that is in development at the moment. It's hopefully something that will go along. And we also work with our colleagues in Natural England in catchment sensitive farming, who promote the sort of work that's been going on around Welland. So they're also working with us as well. So yeah, those natural interventions are important and they are happening, but it's probably something we need to speak more about and tell people more about.
Sorry, I was just going to add as well that I think Kevin from United Utilities is here, might be able to correct me on this if I say something wrong, but I think there's also a move with South Cumbria Rivers Trust, if there's enough community support for it, to try and move people onto the main sewage system and get them off of septic tanks as well, but it needs to be enough people within the community to actually justify the cost and effort involved in doing that. So
Yeah, so I think we can probably take use of the evidence that we have to try and inform what we do. And there's some really good principles around nutrient reduction that relate to impacting the sources of those nutrients, how they're getting moved around and mobilised in the catchment before they even get to the riparian buffer strips and the wetlands where they get removed. So I think we need to look at where it's most effective to do those reductions and most cost effective and target those first, because I think it's really easy to get caught up in the whole kind of area of nature-based solutions without actually thinking, is that the right thing in the right place? And we do need to do that and implement that carefully.
Become involved. I'm sure many of you are already involved by living and working locally, but to become involved in this debate that's emerged around Windermere, to engage with the information and data and evidence that is out there, and to speak about these things with your friends and family and colleagues, because I've been amazed as a scientist about the amount of airtime that Windermere and its catchment is getting locally, regionally and nationally. I've also been amazed by some of the things that are being said and reported in inverted commas. And just being here and asking questions and challenging and thinking about some of those things, I think is a really important action, in addition to things such as could we plant this and could we plant that, which I fully support. Another thing that I would spend money on is more of these type of events. As a scientist, it's really hard for me to justify my time and to organise that. If we didn't have the big Windermere survey, I doubt whether we would be able to organise this type of event from a university perspective. And yet I think it's really important in order to have these type of conversations to provide some balance to some of the narrative that's around at the moment.
One more question, and then sorry. Well, hot tubs. There's a lot of hot tubs on the catchment, and if they're in holiday cottages and things, they need to be flushed out every time. Where does the water go? And what are the chemicals in that water? And what does it do? Because it's nasty chlorine stuff.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
And with that,
I think please don't quote me on this, because I'm not an environment officer and I don't advise on these things, but having spoken to one of our environment officers, I think that we advise that it is not put into, if it's off mains, it's not put into a package treatment plant or a septic tank, because as you say, the chlorine in there would kill off the bacteria in that septic tank or package treatment plant that's actually doing the good work and removing things from there. So then I'm not entirely sure what our advice is on what to do with it when it's cleaned out. And I know from looking at some of the properties around Windermere and the permits that we have and doing a bit of snooping on websites, that there are places that do have holiday lets that do have hot tubs, etc., that are being discharged somewhere and be or close to the lake shore or close to watercourses.
So like wet drives on red hot days, on changeover days?
Yes, so it is something that probably needs looking at. How high up the list of priorities it is, I'm not too sure in terms of the actual issues it's causing, but yeah, it is something that needs looking at, and it's probably going to be an increasing issue as well, I think.
Right, I'm going to draw the evening to a conclusion. What I will say is, if anybody has any further questions from tonight, if they could fire them into the FBA info at Windermere or even the general FBA address, we will try and answer those questions as best we can for you. If we don't know the answer, we'll signpost you to the person who does know the answer. So I'm very keen, following on from Ben's point, that we use tonight to not just start the conversation, but continue the conversation. And I personally would like to have more of these type of events to keep the conversation going about Windermere, so we can keep sharing the data and our experiences and co-create and co-deliver some of the solutions that we all want to see to improve this iconic lake that we all care about so much. So I'm just going to say one or two thank you. So I'll probably forget someone and I'll get a kick at the end of the night. But I wanted to first of all thank all of you for coming. This event was a sellout. Not that we were selling, I suspect, you know. But thank you. I mean, we filled the room. We didn't actually know if we were going to do that, and I take that as a really strong indication of the community's willingness and interest to participate in the future of the lake. And I think that's a huge shot in the arm for everybody that's helped organise tonight. I wanted to also thank our speakers. You've been spoiled tonight. These truly are world-class scientists and experts in their field, and I hope everybody would join me in giving a small amount of appreciation. That's enough.
He doesn't want us getting too big-headed about
No, let's want to get out the door. I'd just like to also make thanks for Lancaster University, who have actually provided the funding for tonight as well. It's really important that we acknowledge that support. It's enabled us to keep the evening an independent evening where we don't have too many badges or associations, because we want this to be generally a community-led approach. I've got some good news for you and a challenge. Start with the challenge first. We've got the next big Windermere survey next Sunday. Unfortunately, this is the first one I'm not going to be at. I'm absolutely gutted, but I've got a mega important family occasion that I've got to go to. So I make my apologies to all of you now for my tardy response. If you would like to participate, you will be hugely welcome, and I think you'll have a great time. We have the 4 hubs, and we will have a really good time obtaining the samples, and no matter what the weather throws at us, you can come and ask more questions at the hub. It's a great opportunity. If you'd like to participate, just Emma is the person you need to contact, and if you go onto our website, you'll see there's a citizen science section, but you must have emails coming out of every orifice about Windermere at the moment. Sorry? Weekend after. Didn't I say that? No. Oh, well, there you go. It's good to be amongst friends. Okay, so thank you for that correction. I think Emma was. I wonder why you were looking a bit panicked when I said that. Anyway, moving on. We have just secured a little bit of extra funding for the Windermere survey. So thanks to Westmoreland Furnace Council, we've secured a grant of about 41,500. I've got that right. Okay, and that will basically fund the next kind of 2.5 surveys. So we have a shortfall at the moment of about £12,000 to be able to do the spring survey. I'm getting this right, this is good. And we're looking to fund that shortfall as soon as possible. The reason I mention that is the logistical, you see one picture of the logistical challenge around this survey. That does not do it any justice. It's a full-time job, so as soon as we can plug that funding gap, the better. And we are trying to secure a multi-year grant at the moment also for that, but we're away off that. My plea is, if there's anyone in the room who has corporate connections or is part of a network where people you think might be able to help us secure the funding and allow us to do this great science, this great engagement work, please do come and see me afterwards or drop me an email. So that's a plea. I always get my flat cap out at the end of any event where there's 100 or so people in there. You'd expect me to do that. So I think that's all I'm going to say, other than thanks very much for coming. It's been a foul weather night, and for everybody to drive through that, I think is a tremendous feather in everybody's cap. Safe journey home, and really look forward to seeing you on the surveys, at the next event, or whenever you want to get involved with